anything that's worth more than peace and love on the planet Earth? Whoa. Hi, I'm Kamiko, and I spent 9 months making my Pink Diamond cosplay from Steven Universe. As Sarah Spaceman says, you don't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been. I actually rewatched Steven Universe 5 times during the making of this cosplay, so much so that I actually bought the box set DVD set because I was so tired of the 2-minute ad break for these 11-minute episodes. As an artist, I like to draw out all of my complicated builds just because it further acquaints me with the character and it helps me visualize what I'm about to make. This is the design that I came up with. Now, I didn't decide on the corseted bodysuit because this is something I'm going to dance in, but I think the final came pretty darn close to my original design. The last thing that I'll say is thanks to the help of Lutavia and Bird King on Instagram, I finally decided that I wanted to make this cosplay ballet inspired. Since Rebecca Sugar, I think, took heavy inspiration from both ballet and jester costumes when designing Pink Diamond. If you're curious, the Harlequinade ballet from 2018 is the one that I closely referenced when designing this cosplay and constructing this cosplay. So there are heavy inspirations of theatrical costume construction and ballet costume construction when I made this cosplay. Now, without further ado, let me tell you how I made Pink Diamond. Despite not knowing what direction I wanted to take with this cosplay, I started off the way I always do, with the duct tape pattern. So here I tried to mimic a ballet bodice, but more as a bodysuit instead of the detachable panty and bodice part. I did reference several images online of ballet bodices, and I tried to get pretty close with this first mock-up, but since this is a competition piece, I was a little scared about not being fully accurate with the fit of this cosplay, so while I think it turned out pretty okay, I decided against going in this direction for my cosplay pattern. I will say that my patterning definitely has improved because look at how accurate the fit of this bodysuit is. Let's meet my lovely dinosaur assistant. This is Ember. She's a park ranger dino. Please show her the utmost respect while she bombards on this update today. I'm just making this video because there are a lot of crazy things going on with the mock-ups for my Pink Diamond cosplay, so I just wanted to explain what you're looking at as you're watching this run through. So the first mock-up that I did is obviously the duct tape mock-up, but what we're basically doing for this cosplay is I purchased this pattern from Tutus That Dance. This is bodice D, I believe. That might be a lie. It's size C, I don't remember the bodice name, but I'm using this as the pattern for this cosplay. Technically it is not a bodysuit, but this cosplay is inspired by ballet pieces, so I thought a ballet bodice would be the best thing to do. I didn't film me using the mock-up process just because I have had no idea what I've been doing with this cosplay for a long time, but I finally feel like I'm getting somewhere, so I'm finally filming it. I'm happy with how the mock-up fits. I'm going to stick with the ballet bodice pieces, so what I am currently cutting out are the final pieces. I did not film the mock-up process for this, so this is going to be a little bit more complicated than when I usually cut out pattern pieces for cosplays, but I think it's going to turn out great. So let's get started. Cross grain, selvage, cross grain, grain. So when I meant complicated, I was not kidding. Ballet bodices are very particular so that the bodice can be altered and can fit around any kind of dancer's body properly. So the way that you cut these pattern pieces out matters way more. I'd say even more than regular corsets. Basically, you have to cut your center front and your center back on the grain, which is the strongest part of the fabric. The rest of the pattern pieces are cut on the bias so that they can properly stretch around the body when finished. This specific pattern calls for 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I'm starting off by cutting my structure layer out of canvas. You can use twill or bengaline for ballet bodices if you want a little bit of stretch, but I wanted mine to kind of act more like a corset, so I decided to opt for canvas, since this is pretty cheap anyway. This ballet bodice counts for 6 total pattern pieces, and once these are cut out of the canvas, we can start cutting them out of my fashion fabrics. Now I had a really hard time figuring out what fabrics I wanted to use for this project, but basically for the darker pink portion, I'm using this embossed satin that I purchased off of Etsy, and for the lighter portions, I decided to use this really pretty corduroy. Now I know, I usually opt for velveteen whenever I can, but there is a specific reason why I couldn't use it in this project that I'll explain to you later. This is my mock-up. I thought I was going to use the bust pieces, but I wanted a little bit lower. So I figured, so I don't make a mistake and go, oh, this is the bust line in the future, I'm going to line this with pink because this is for pink diamond. Ain't that smart? Then what I'm going to do is I have the bust line drawn on my pattern pieces, but I'm going to adjust them to have this smaller line. But I'm not gonna do that in pink because I don't know if that's the greatest idea in the world. But anyway, the reason I'm doing this is because, is this a good idea? Am I doing this right? Maybe. The reason I'm doing this is because these two fabrics right here, these beautiful fabrics, my embossed satin and my corduroy, they cannot be flatlined together. If they are flatlined together, this piece will be too thick, and this is also like 3D, so I don't know if embossing, like flatlining something that is embossed, I don't think that's a good idea. So what I'm going to do is have these pieces act as one. I think it'll be fine since all of these are getting flatlined to the canvas anyway. But since this is the top fabric, what I'm going to do is basically hold these over these pieces and then cut them out so that this bottom part is the embossed fabric, the top part is the corduroy, but it's all one piece. That way there's no weird shit going on. Okay, so here's how this is going. This is the front pattern piece as an example. As you can see, the piece under me is larger than what I'm going for. The corduroy, I pieced it and then I drew out where I wanted the piece to go. And as you can see, this is the line where I want the pink to stop and the brocade to start. Except the only thing I noticed is between these two pattern pieces, I do like the cording one better. This is very delicate work, so wish me luck. This is by far one of the most complicated structural garments I have ever made in my 3 years of making cosplay costumes. Please bear with me, this gets very complicated. Basically what I am doing is I am sewing the embossed and the corduroy layers together, and I'm sandwiching this handmade cording in between the layers so that there's a nice pretty transition for both pattern pieces. This has to get done first, and then we are going to trim these down to size. Since there's no real way for me to feed something like this through my usual fray check method, the serger, I decided to use my pinking shears for this. It would allow me to fray check it, but also cut down some extra bulk as well. Okay, I laid everything out flat so you can kind of get a better idea of what I'm doing. So this is pattern piece from the center front all the way to center back. These are all of the canvas pieces that I have made. These are cut and they're the exact same shape as these. They're just backwards. Ignore that. These are the corduroy, cording, embossing satin, whatever this is. These are bigger than these pattern pieces because I'm going to serge them down to the size of the canvas ones. So it's canvas, fashion fabric. These are all going to get serged, you know, so that they meet these pieces, and then we'll be good to actually start sewing this. Okay, so I have pattern piece 1, 2, and 6. You're not supposed to put boning on any of the side seams or the back, except for the center front back. So I mapped out where the middle of this pattern piece is,
which I'm doing on this because a lot of these have huge seam allowances, which is why I don't want to do this on the fabric. And then what I'm going to do is draw that onto here, and this is where I'm going to put my boning channels. And this has to get done before I serge the pieces together, because it'll be quite hard to get this done without catching the fashion lining while doing it. So this looks like the smarter way to do this. There we go. Then I'm just gonna draw. Okay, and then I'm gonna sew the twill tape to this line, and then we'll get to serging.
Okay, so now we have to prep the pattern pieces for the front and the back bodice pieces. These are the only ones that are going to get boning directly in the garment fashion pieces. Canvas fabric is really easy to draw on, so for drawing out all of these pieces, I'm just using a regular pencil. That way it doesn't show through the fabric, and it's also easy to erase if I make any mistakes. Now my pattern does not account for the boning channels for the front and back bodice pieces, so all I have done is just folded them in half in order to figure out where I need to sew these boning channels in. Now that we have our lines drawn out as our sewing guide, what I'm going to do is sew all of the boning channels in. I was watching a video on ballet bodice construction, and they actually recommend to do like a chain style stitching, so I'm not really cutting anything as I'm going. I'm kind of just sewing all the pieces one by one, all in one direction, and then turning it around and doing it the same to the other side. Backstitching isn't really required for the boning channels since we are going to be serging this later, so this chain style stitching method actually makes this process go by a lot faster. So after we have the front and back panels boning channels added in, now we can actually serge all of the panel pieces. So I'm talking all 12 panel pieces. When doing my research on ballet bodice construction, what was advised to me was to start with the longest side of your bodice first. So for these panel pieces, like the side front for example, you want to start on the side that curves and has the longest amount of distance to cover. This kind of makes the process go by a little bit faster, but also helps to cut down on any of that puckering that happens when you serge panel pieces. After all of the panel pieces are serged, all that's left to do is to sew all of the pattern pieces right sides together. As usual, I like to start from the front and work my way to the back, sewing each pattern piece as I go.
Guys, I have been dreading finishing the bodice for this cosplay for literally like 4 months because I just could not figure out a design that I liked. And when I tell you I am just over the moon happy with how this turned out, all of the cording matches, the rose detailing is beautiful, the patterning is great. For now, a win is a win.
Pressing your garments is very important, but it is especially important for something as strategic and complicated as a ballet bodice that needs to wrap around the body very well. Now, if you do not have a pressing ham for a lot of these curved seams, what I'm using here is a pillowcase that I just rolled up and kind of pressed into the shape that I needed. Obviously, a pressing ham would be easier to use, but hey, you gotta do what you gotta do.
Okay, so I can't finish the bodice today because I don't have any spiral steel boning, so I'm gonna work on the embellishments for it while I wait. I was looking at some references, and here's the kind of stuff that I was looking at, like these 3D kind of embellishments I think are really pretty. And I also like the little pieces of sequins that they have too, but since this is Rose Quartz, spoiler alert, I was thinking of doing roses instead. These are just made with felt, but I'm kind of liking how that's looking. I'm gonna make about 5 more and see what I think, but I don't know, man. I feel like I'm getting somewhere.
The two felts that I'm using for this cosplay are these two pinks that I tried to color match to the pieces of the bodice. So what I am using is called a die cutter, and you will need dies in order to use a die cutter. This die that I'm using specifically is one that I found off Amazon that is really great for rose shapes. Basically what you do is you sandwich your fabric and your dies in between these two plates. If you've been using yours a while or buy it secondhand, they will look a little crusty like mine, and it is best to kind of rotate them as you use them so they're less likely to crack and you don't have to replace them as soon. Now, die cutters are actually intended for scrapbooking, so they're mostly made to cut through paper. Now, I have starched fabric and used them to cut roses as well, but I personally find felt to be the most compatible fabric to use for die cutters. Mini anecdote, but I actually purchased this die cutter all the way back in 2024 for my Rose Miku cosplay. This is honestly the closest method to die cutting from the Victorian era, and I want it to be super historically accurate for that cosplay. Unfortunately, as cute as these roses are, they only make them in about a quarter size shape, which would not be big enough for my Rose Miku cosplay. But luckily for Pink Diamond, they are the perfect size. Die cutting makes making fake flowers super quick and easy, so if you make a lot of fake flowers like I do, I definitely recommend giving it a buy.
It's a little floppier than I'd like, but I was using the
They're so cute. They look like felt.
Of course, I had to add a little.
Okay, let's get back on track and finish the boning for this bodice. So what I am using here is the same twill tape that I used for the front and back boning channels, but this time I am sewing channels only through the twill tape. Now, when doing my research for constructing ballet bodices, everyone disagrees on what kind of boning you should use for them. Personally, I decided to use spiral steel just because it's both compatible with ballet bodices and corsets, so I think it's the most economical choice. The only downside, in my opinion, to using spiral steel is that it is extremely difficult to cut unless you have a specific set of pliers used for cutting spiral steel. I personally don't have them, so what I recommend that you do is instead of trying to cut the entire thing in one go, try to chip away at the sides of it, and it makes it a lot easier to cut. Also, the movement that I was doing helps to kind of file down and weaken the link, which makes it easier to cut as well. Alright, do you remember those boning channels that we made out of twill tape? Well, now we get to use them. So for the rest of the bodice pieces, especially the ones in the front, we are going to be sewing in the boning channels using the herringbone stitch. I did struggle with the herringbone stitch initially when I was sewing it, but what really helped me to kind of nail this stitch down is the idea that it is crossing over itself. So you cross over, back to where you come from, cross over. And that mindset really helped me to get this stitch down. So in total, there's going to be 9 boning channels in this bodice. Obviously, there's the 2 at the back that we sewed into the back bodice pieces, and then there's going to be 4 already in the front 2 pattern pieces, and then the 3 that we are sewing at the front seams of the bodice. It was specifically instructed in the videos that I watched that you do not put any boning in the side seam at all.
Okay, this took me 20 minutes to figure out. I believe ballet bodices are the hooks go on the left side, the eyes go on the right side. So the hooks, as you can see, they are hooking that way but coming in this way, and I've pinned here, so I'm gonna sew as close to these bars as I can with my machine. Here's my seam allowance. So when these get folded in, it'll look like that. The eye part I had more trouble with. So here is the flap. The eyes are going that way, but when I go to fold this, they will point this way. I'm also using a zipper foot for this, since you don't want to hit any bones. I'm also going to I'm not gonna sew this with my machine. I'm gonna sew this with my hand wheel so that if I do hit a bone, I don't break a needle.
Now, another method that you could use, arguably smarter than what I did, is to actually hand sew singular hook and bars, like the ones that come in a little set and not on the strip. This does take a little bit longer, maybe. Honestly, it might be faster considering I'm using the hand wheel, but I've heard from the videos that I've watched on ballet bodices that hand sewing all of the pieces down is actually stronger than using hook and tape. Well, whichever method you do end up choosing, you are going to have to sew down the excess seam allowance of the back seam. I decided to be fancy and continue using the cross herringbone stitch, but you can also just use a simple whip stitch for this. I'm also opting to use embroidery floss as I still had it and I thought it looked pretty and I thought it would be a little bit more secure than just using regular thread. Now, the very last step that I'm doing for this ballet bodice is finishing the seams of the top and the bottom. With corsets, you would do something called binding, and for ballet bodices, you can either use piping or cording. I decided to use cording since I used it for the other pieces of the bodice. Basically, I just sandwiched this yarn from my sister's stash in order to create the cording out of the matching fabric. Now, one of my biggest regrets with constructing this ballet bodice is actually how I did the cording. I actually cut off the excess pieces because I wasn't really sure how to get them to line up properly, but by doing it this way, it meant that I couldn't get a clean finish here when I was hand sewing the pieces down. So you could arguably do like a whip stitch if you have enough to get like a super clean finish, but for this bodice, I just did a simple whip stitch because it was just going to come out bad anyway. But at some point, I'll probably end up redoing this part. Once the ballet bodice was finished, I actually had the hardest time figuring out how I wanted to decorate it. Bedazzling pieces has worked really well for me in the past, so I decided I would start there, but unfortunately, I didn't actually end up liking how this looked. It's a shame because I did spend 2 hours bedazzling everything, but don't worry, I found a way to add bedazzling to this cosplay anyhow. Removing the bedazzling would have been difficult since I did use gem tack for this, so what I ended up doing was just adding extra roses to the bodice, and I actually think it worked out because it honestly helped to kind of balance out the silhouette of the bodice. And here's how it turned out. I think it looks pretty clean considering this was my first time making something this complicated before, but we're not done yet, so.
Okay, so here's the pink diamond bodice. I got the pattern a little bit wonky, but it's all the way up here because I intend to, like fold it like so. So it's not gonna cut that high when I'm done with it. Basically what I did is I made a paper pattern. So here's the paper pattern I made. I just kind of measured it till I got the shape that I wanted. And then I cut some canvas fabric and then some spandex. And I stretched it as I spaced it down so that it lies nice and flat. I did try interfacing and it did not work. And if you can kind of tell, it's a little glittery. It's got a nice sheen to it. Basically, I'm gonna go through and fold this in and prick stitch it down with very teeny tiny stitches so that it's almost invisible. And then the bodice piece will be done and ready for the glue. The only thing is, this, I could imagine if I glue the gem directly to this would probably be a problem. So I think what I'm gonna do is map out where the gem's gonna get glued and whip stitch there as well. That way it doesn't do this when I'm wearing it, because these pieces are not like interfaced together, they're flat lined. And the gem's quite heavy, so I could see that happening. But yeah, that's basically what I'm gonna get started doing.
I bought a 3D file of Pink Diamond's gem on Etsy, and then I made a silicone mold of it and casted it in resin. I did the same thing that I did for Star Guardian Zaya. I just used eyeshadow from my Juvia's Place palette and mixed it into the resin to get the color payoff. So here is how the first mold came out. I was kind of having a suspicion that I thought the gem was going to be too small, and I decided to cast it anyway, but after casting, this kind of confirmed to me that this gem is really pretty, just not the right size. After multiple trials and errors, basically what I came up with was my own gem pattern. If you've ever seen any of those diamond paper patterns on like Pinterest or Google, It's basically that. But instead of using paper, I used cardboard. I covered it in foam clay, sanded it, and then sprayed it in Plastidip. So now I will begin the process of casting 1 of 8 total resin gems. So unfortunately, I had way more issues casting the gems than I did with my Star Guardian Zaya gems. Upon doing further research, apparently eyeshadow has mica powder in it, and that really helps to cut down on air bubbles, which is why I didn't get any of them in my first cast. However, I really wanted a really light pink color payoff for my gem, and I decided to use alcohol dye, which left my cast way more prone to air bubbles than the ones with the mica powder. Here is an example of what I'm talking about. This gem looks fine from afar, but if you look close up, right up against where the resin was casting next to the silicone, there are hundreds of little air bubbles right at the surface of the cast. To be honest, I've tried everything: sanding, mixing the resin, heating the resin up, putting the resin in different places, mold release, but if I were to guess, I would think that my silicone is the problem. It's common knowledge that by not mixing your resin properly, or by mixing it too much or heating it up too much, you can get air bubbles at the top of your mold, and that comes from not mixing it properly. But if you get bubbles at the surface, it means that there's air in your mold that gets trapped while the resin is casting, which is why it will not be visible when it first starts to cure, and it'll only show up after it's fully cured. Unfortunately for this project, I never really did figure out how to get them to completely go away, but I was able to minimize them by using the Man Release mold spray, but a very, very small amount. Just misting it on the silicone really helped. Another great thing is that the glitter that I added to my mold also really helped to kind of distract the eye from the bubbles. But anyway, once you have your 2 parts resin mixed up properly, you do want to mix this for at least a minute before you pour it. I'm pouring it into my silicone molds now. The best way to not incorporate extra air bubbles into your mold is by pouring it in very thin amounts from the top of the mold to the bottom and as far away from the mold as possible, which is why my hand is out of the frame, because it's so far away from the resin, and hopefully that helps to not add any extra air bubbles to my mold. Another thing that you can do to help minimize bubbles is to heat up your resin, especially if you're in a colder environment where the resin does not have a warm place to cure. Here I'm just using a heat gun. The important part is not to overdo it, as this can actually incorporate more air bubbles into your resin, and you don't want that. My resin cast took about 3 days to fully cure since this gem is very dense. I sprayed it with the clear enamel spray paint from Rust-Oleum, and then I used E6000 to glue it to the bodice. You might be able to see that there's a little bit of a gap between the resin and the bodice. I did go back with some more E6000 and a clamp when it was drying to help it stay a little bit more flat up against the bodice. But anyway, after that fully cured, which for the E6000 took about, I think I left it out there about 3 days, I decided to add the rest of the beading. For the beading, I'm just doing a simple back stitch, and I'm using a combination of seed beads and bugle beads. I actually learned this from Sarcasm Hime's panel at Holmat last year, but you want to separate your bugle beads as they are sometimes cut super sharp and can actually cut the threads of your beading. So I'm separating them with seed beads in order to, 1, make it look really cute, and 2, to help with the bugle beads from not cutting my thread. I also like to use wax thread for all of my hand beading. Hello friends, it's been a bit since I've given you a live update on how Pink Diamond has been going. It's been a little out of order because I've had a lot of problems come up and I've been experiencing a lot of burnout when it comes to cosplay making, and filming is really hard when you don't have motivation to make stuff. So anyway, the reason it's been taking so long is because I redid my Miku build
in time for DreamHack. I unfortunately didn't film any footage of me making this entire wig that I made, which is a shame because I wanted to update my drill curl video, but I needed a 3-day project that I just... you know what I mean? Not to worry, I have plans to do another drill curl cosplay so I can show you the updated tutorial since I've changed a bit of the ways that I've done drill curls now, but unfortunately that will not be for a while since I didn't film making this, but wish me luck on that. Anyway, for contest updates, Winter Cosplay Championships close their applications August 16th, I believe. I applied maybe 3 days after it opened because the cosplay is like 80% done, but we should be hearing back next week if I get accepted. So here's to competing. This will be my 3rd time competing at WCC. I've never placed. I did get a minor award the first time I competed. I don't know if I'll get in this time because I am a novice cosplayer, but I would love to do a skit for Pink Diamond, so I'm hoping I get accepted again, but I won't know for another week. Either way, that is not going to halt progress on this. Those are just... Anyway, here is what was taking so long. This goddamn gem. So, as you can see, she is finished. The finish is not as nice as I would like for it to be, but it's good enough. You'll probably notice that there are some bubbles under here, and it's a little uneven here. I tried my best. It's gonna have imperfections on it. Anyway, like when I said that there were 7 gems I had to throw away, I'm not kidding. In my case, there's gas happening at the silicone layer, and they're impossible to get rid of. The only way you can fix it is by sanding it, which I did to the best of my ability, but it's not perfect. If you're going to sand resin, which is what I ended up doing for this mold, I purchased a Dremel tool. I purchased it on sale for $50. I got the battery pack version. If you do want a cheaper alternative to the Dremel tool, you might think it's unnecessary, but sanding resin is different from sanding something like a 3D print or a wood filler or foam clay. Like it's a tougher material, so it is very time consuming to sand. When I say the Dremel tool will speed up your process by hours, I'm not kidding. The other thing that you might not think about with sanding resin is I did some research on sanding resin. Again, it is not like sanding other materials. Other materials, when you sand them, they get like a powder. And while you shouldn't breathe it in, wood powder is going to be less damaging to your eyes than resin powder. Resin powder can scratch the cornea of your eye. So it is imperative that you either work in an enclosed environment where the resin particles can't get out, or if you can't afford those because they're $100, you can get eye goggles, but they have to be sealed to your face because you do not want resin particles in your eye, and you obviously don't want to breathe that in either. You can get Pink Diamond gems 3D printed, you can make them out of clay, you can make them out of foam clay. There's a lot of cheaper alternatives to doing them. Resin, I would argue, is the most expensive. It's just with the resin, you get this really clear kind of gem look. But I'm telling you right now, unless you buy the gem pre-made, these are very expensive to make. With the resin gem being done, the hardest part of the bodice is finally finished, so I can go ahead and finish the rest parts of the bodice, and then we can finally move on to the sleeves and the peplum.
So I wasn't super happy with the Rust-Oleum enamel spray, so I decided to do nail polish on top of it to add a little bit more sheen and to also help to level out the unevenness of the resin a little bit more. For resin cast, the best kind of nail polish you can use is the UV gel nail polish. I could have just gotten a regular clear one, but I wasn't super happy with the payoff of the fine glitter I used in the resin cast, so I decided to get a clear glitter one instead. This specific UV nail polish dries with a UV lamp. You definitely don't want this touching your skin, but it dries pretty quickly. It took about 30 seconds for it to fully cure. Oh my god, I'm so glad I did this extra step. It looks so much better with the nail polish. I mean, look at it. Alright, now we can finally move on to the last part of this bodice, which is the sleeves. I'm using a taffeta fabric for this, which I will explain later, but I found the best way for me to get even box pleats was to physically draft them out. I did try the fork method, and I like them for knife pleats, but for box pleats, this turned out to be a little bit more accurate for me. I can't remember what these specific pens are called. It's not water soluble, but it kind of disappears after like 30 minutes of use. So that's what I'm using for the pleats. After I have all of the pieces kind of mapped out, I'm using my small pins to pin everything in place. So basically I'm just matching the fold to the lines that I created. And I'm using pins in both the middle and the edges so that everything stays flat when I go to iron this. If I remember correctly, I think I spaced out my box pleats about 2 inches apart, and I'm also going to base stitch this down so that this stays flat while I'm ironing it. I spaced out all of my stitches about 2 inches apart, but anyways, after I finished all of my stitching, I went to the iron to press all of my pleats flat. Now, I didn't have the greatest luck when filming this, but I highly recommend steaming your pleats when you go to iron them, because then the taffeta will listen to you. This is the generic sleeve pattern that I went with for these sleeves, so basically they're going to get bound at the top and the bottom before I sew them closed at the sides. But first, I am going to take these to my serger just to finish off these raw edges. This isn't completely necessary since we are going to bind the edges after this, but I'm one of those people, I gotta serge it. I gotta know that this seam is finished even underneath my binding. Next, I'm going to actually bind the sleeves. Now, I am using a brocade for this, which is a pretty notorious fabric for not listening when you tell it to do something. What I recommend for this is to 1, cut it on the bias, and 2, cut way more than what you think you need, so that if it does fray on you, you can just cut off the excess. Okay, so I was super inspired by Pixel Drink's Pink Diamond cosplay, which I saw on both TikTok and Instagram. They had like a rose insert for their sleeve, which I thought was super cute. They did pleat it, and I had a lot of trouble trying to replicate that technique, so I went online to try to find a different alternative, and this was the alternative that I found. It's kind of like an inverted pleat, and I found success with it, so let me show you how I made it.
It's not perfect, but roses are not perfect. And this took a lot longer than that 5-second video I watched on how to make this. But anyway, since I finally figured it out, let's do the other one. And if the other one comes out weird too and slightly different, roses look different in nature, so this is fine.
Okay, so what the video called for is a kind of triangular shape. I'll show you the measurements of the one that I used later on in this clip, but basically you have to sew one side closed and the other side is on the fold. Now, since brocade frays really bad, I am fray checking this, and hitting this with my pinking shears. Kind of unnecessary, but I'm paranoid, and I really don't want this to fray, so I'm doing both. So one seam is on the fold, the other seam is sewn closed, and then the last seam is completely open, which is why I'm fray checking it as well. That's how we're going to gain access to the pleats later on.
I tweaked the pattern a little bit, so if you are interested in replicating this for some reason, let's see. It is 20 inches this way. $10, $14, and supposedly 14 on this side.
Alright, so here comes the hard, fiddly part. You are going to turn your triangle inside out and then slowly but surely begin to pleat little by little until you eventually get a rose shape. Now, for the canvas mock-up that I had earlier, it pleated really well. But since this brocade is very stiff and almost like paper, I did have to tack this one, whereas with the canvas one, I didn't have to sew it at all. But for this part, it's kind of impossible, in my opinion, to get everything completely symmetrical. So I kind of try to embrace the fact that roses aren't really symmetrical in nature and just kind of listen to the garment and see where it wants to be tacked. But a general rule of thumb is once you start to get to the larger pleats, I had to add more tacking, but I did around 4 stitches for each pleat for it to completely stay in its shape. And once again, I'm using the waxed thread for this.
Okay, so this one might have turned out better, but I still worked really hard on this one, and I don't want to make another one. My excuse is no rose looks the same. Now this one might look better, but look, now they're the same, okay? Don't hate on my rose petals. Let's get working on the sleeves next. Okay, so these are the pressed sleeves. I figured out steaming them actually got them to lie flat because the taffeta was kind of fighting with me. They're gonna get a little prick stitch on all of these little squares, but first I want to map out this so that I know not to prick stitch anywhere around it, because it's gonna be pretty hard to lay this over it if there's all those things. But yeah, the sleeve inserts are gonna sit in the middle, so I could probably get away with pricking these. Yeah.
Okay, so now I'm going to take my pink pearls and my pink embroidery floss, and I'm going to start hand stitching all of these box pleats flat. So this creates kind of an illusion of a diamond shape, as the kind of shape that the pleat leaves behind, like in the underside, creates a diamond. Although I'm going to be real with you, I was fully intending to actually honey smock these sleeves, but the 2 reasons for me not doing that is 1, I was way too lazy, and 2, honey smocking kind of manipulates the fabric so that it would be very difficult to add the sleeve portion on top of it. So I decided to do it this way because it allowed the fabric to still kind of stay flat, which would allow me to sew the roses on without kind of messing with the shape of the sleeve. It's a bit of a shame because I absolutely love the look of honey smocking, but with that problem that I was having beforehand, and also I think honey smocking is really hard to resize, I just thought this was the better option, so maybe I'll save it for next time. After all of the hand stitching for the sleeves is done, we actually need to sew the rose portion on as well. I could not think of a better way to do this other than just whip stitching it to the sleeve, so that's what I did. I'm using that same quilted thread and I'm doing like a whip stitch, but I'm trying to be very intentional with my stitches and make this almost invisible. And since this thread is a very close color to the actual sleeve portion, I would say it's a hard one to see. Overall, with all of the added hand stitching that I did to the sleeves, it did add about an extra week to the construction of them, but I think it was worth it. I think all of these added details just really tell a story and add extra beautiful detail to this cosplay. With all of the added embellishments done for the sleeves, we can actually finish binding them. So now what I'm doing is called a stitch in the ditch. Basically, I have folded the excess fabric from my binding when I first top stitched it down the first time, and I flipped it over and pinned it so that I can stitch it in the ditch, basically right between where the two fabrics meet. This means that it's completely visible from the top portion, as long as I did it right, and then it catches the underside while I'm at it. The last thing I do before I sew the sleeves closed is to add the elastic so that these can be super stretchy and comfortable to wear. If you've never heard of a bodkin like I did for the first 3 years of sewing, I highly recommend that you use this. My only complaint with the bodkin is that you do need a big enough channel for it to go through, but in my opinion, I think it's a lot easier to use than a safety pin, and it is less likely to open on you while you're feeding your elastic through your channel, so definitely give it a try. Okay, so the very last piece for the top is actually the undershirt. Now, I'm deciding to make this because while I don't mind adding face paint to my face, I don't like using body paint. I think it's really annoying and it could transfer to my costume, so I'm making myself an undershirt so I don't have to paint my skin. So you might be tempted to skip this step, as since this is a stretch fabric, you probably could just serge your seams together, but a seam that is sewn is always going to be stronger than a serged seam. So I am serging all of my pattern pieces before I actually sew them together. Some quick things to note is that I used the cut and sew bodysuit, which I purchased from their booth at DragonCon, probably back in 2023. I've had this pattern for a while. I was initially going to make it a bodysuit, but then I decided against it and just turned it into a shirt. The other thing is that I am using a really pretty glittery spandex fabric. So if you're curious why my fabric has a little bit of a sheen to it, that is why. But I will explain a little bit more of the fabric choices that I make later on in this video. So the reason I'm not explaining how I made this bodysuit is because Cut and Sew has a really comprehensive instruction, like PDF file in their pack, which explains how to construct this. But something really cool I learned about when sewing this is something called a lightning stitch or a stretch stitch. Basically, it is a completely straight stitch, but it stretches. It back stitches while it does it, so I think it might be a little bit stronger than the usual method for stretch stitching, which is what I use, which is a zigzag stitch. But honestly, I think this is pretty cool, and I love learning new things about sewing. Anyhow, this is how the shirt came out. I think it turned out pretty decently, and it's also comfortable to wear, which is the important part. Now, if you do notice some of the puckering in the back seam of my shirt, that is because I didn't press it. I promise you I fixed this later on. Anyway, with these last pieces being done, the top portion of the cosplay is finally done, so I can talk about the peplum and the shorts now.
Ignore if I got spots on my clothes. I left my charger outside and then it rained on me. So I just came back from the fabric store. Actually, came back from the fabric store, had heat exhaustion, took a nap, and then I started recording. But anyway, I needed to explain something to you guys because it might make my work progress a little bit confusing and I gotta explain myself. This is the peplum that I'm making. As you can see, the entire bottom part is beaded and I'm working on beading the top part right now. It looks really cute, but if you hold it up to here, you see the problem I'm talking about? The brocade looks fine. I think the brocade is a nice transfer because it's got the same kind of print as the, you know, the embossed fabric does. But you see how these pinks don't match? I bought a Dupioni that's got like a gold shift to it, and I think here these just don't work together. It's a shame because I literally spent months beating this, but honestly, I've been feeling pretty weird about the peplum for a while now, so I'm disappointed, but I knew I was going to end up I was kind of feeling this way for a while. I'm planning to use this for a Sakura Miku cosplay, just because the designs are kind of the same, and this looks really cute pleated, especially with like the two-tone fabric. So not to worry for that, but back to this. I went to the fabric store because I've tried buying 2 different fabrics for this project for the sleeves now, and none of them have been working. So I'm at the point now where I literally took this to the store and tried to find something that's close. I'm a little less worried about being accurate to the character since this corduroy is too light of a pink anyway. I'm more so trying to find a warm tone pink that matches this color properly. This is the first thing that I got. This is taffeta fabric. The LED is gonna mess up the kind of hue, so I'm gonna turn it off for a second. Yeah, this is the color that it is. And if I hold it up to this, yeah. Okay, this is what it actually looks like. The camera's picking up the true color with the light on. So I got 3 yards of this taffeta. Oh. Did I hold them up together? Maybe if I hold it back here. Can you kind of see what I'm talking about? I did go ahead and pick up more of that brocade that I grabbed the first time I went, just because I'm a little afraid the scraps that I have aren't gonna be enough. But it is this brocade fabric with this really pretty iridescent thread. This is not actually white. It looks white when you hold it up to pink fabric, but this is like a very, 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 very light shade of pink. The next thing I got is some spandex. This, once again, I do not know if the camera is gonna pick this up, but it's not shiny. This is a knit fabric. That shine is glitter. But can you kind of see what I'm talking about? It's glitter. It's not sheen. The fabric's not shiny. I feel like this would make sense for Pink Diamond, because if they were real people, like if they were real entities, I feel like their skin would kind of have like a glitter on it, kind of like maybe Edward Cullen, if you catch my drift. Like I'm painting the vibe here, all right? Work with me. Y'all, it's gonna look great. It's just gotta get done. I'm still fighting with the pants right now, so let's get back to working on those pants.
So I got the idea to smock the bloomers for this Pink Diamond cosplay from Sarah Spaceman's iconic Pink Diamond cosplay. So what I'm doing is called floral smocking. It probably goes by another name, but that's one where if I looked it up on YouTube, I could find tutorials on. Anyway, I highly recommend that you look up YouTube tutorials for this. I probably won't do the best explaining this, but in my opinion, the most annoying part of this process is gridding your fabric. If you have something that's already gridded like a gingham fabric, you're lucky and you can skip this step. But basically what I'm doing is going through this entire fabric and doing 2x2 inch squares. The bigger you're smocking, the less you have to do, which is great when you're a lazy person like I am. This is about 5 yards of fabric, about 2.5 yards for each bloomer, but I didn't actually need all of this fabric for each pant leg. So for the hand sewing method, I'm once again going to be using embroidery floss, and I do think it's important that you choose a floss that is very similar to the color of your fabric. It's not super visible, but it is something you could probably see if it's too much of a contrasting fabric. Earlier in the video, I said there was a reason why I didn't use velveteen, and the shorts is actually why. In the design, the bodice and the shorts are the same color, so I had to keep that in mind when choosing fabrics for this cosplay. Velveteen is a fur that is very delicate and very prone to balding if it experiences too much friction, and for something like a short, I don't think that's a good idea. Corduroy is a good alternative because it has the same velvety texture, but it's a little bit stronger. So I do have two recommendations for floral smocking now that I have worn these bloomers out a couple of times. The first thing is that if you do a chain or continuous stitch, basically you don't like cut your thread and restart a new one with each stitch. It is faster, but it does compromise the strength of your stitches from what I found. None of my stitches have come out yet, but I have noticed that the pearls have come out from wearing this. So what I would recommend that you do for the pearls specifically is something called a French knot. You can look this up, but basically it's kind of like a knot where it's not on the back of the fabric, it's kind of engraved in the fabric, like you're knotting the thread into the fabric. That will give you a much more secure stitch and probably save you the pain and suffering of losing a pearl and then not knowing where it's missing when you have 200 floral smocked panels like I do.
Okay, I am done with this one. This is about 13 by 8, and this goes pretty much around the thickest part of my thigh. And then obviously this part's gonna get gathered down. I'll add the little gusset part so I can make these into shorts. And this is long enough for this to be a pretty good size pant leg. So I'm gonna go ahead and start on this side. This one isn't gridded fully. I marked out the lines and then I stopped because this one came out really uneven and I gave up. But this grid was uneven too, and these still look pretty good to me. So I'm gonna go ahead and work on this one anyway. And then there's not gonna be any smocking that goes into my crotch because that doesn't sound like a good idea. Halfway done. Okay, these are the finished smocking pieces. I know they look like food, you can't eat them. These are the inseam pieces. So there's 4 cut out of these. These are gonna get sewn to either side of these, and then they're gonna be sewn like regular pants.
Once all of the pattern pieces for the smocking are ready, I highly recommend doing a gathering stitch. Since you have all of that extra fabric, it's going to help the fabric kind of treat as one piece. After I do this gathering stitch, you know me, I have to serge it.
Okay, so the pieces have been gathered down and these parts have been added. This is a little bigger than I want, so I am gonna have to gather this. But basically what we're going to do is gather this, gather that. This is the waistband, this is the leg band. Then I'm gonna sew bias tape into this channel and elastic, and then I'm gonna sew elastic through here too. It's getting a little confusing, which is why I haven't been filming it, but that's what I'm doing.
Now that I have the binding pieces prepped, I'm basically going to sew them right sides together. I'm going to do this before I do the stitch in the ditch this time because I'm not super confident this is going to come out right. So I'm just going to sew this really quickly so I can see how everything looks first.
Okay, so I was trying these on and I thought I would show you because I think this is absolutely hilarious. I feel like one of those chocobos. I feel like I can, like, you know what I mean? Anyway, it's not just here for giggles. So I added gussets to these so that I can like dance, right? So like that part's good, but like all this extra, like, this is the problem. This is all basted in because I felt like this is where this project was going when I was sewing it. No, I will not stop doing this. But yeah, what I'm going to do is I'm gonna take these apart back to the pant leg And then I'm gonna trim the gussets so that I don't look like I am taking flight. Autobots, roll out! Okay, so I took out the inseam, and I didn't trust myself, so I have clipped them. But I do have a gusset in here, it's just a lot smaller, and already these look a lot better.
Gusset is sewn in. Everything is serged. I made a little oopsie. So this is the crotch seam, and it's gonna get sewn to the other one. Okay, so we had to backpedal a little bit thanks to our chocobo gussets, but now that they're fixed, we can go ahead and finish assembling the pants. Basically, since the side seams are finished, I'm going to do one whole seam, basically closing the crotch of the bloomer closed. Then, just like for the sleeves, we're going to sew the elastic channels into the bloomers and then feed them through with our fancy bodkin.
Okay, here are the new and improved bloomers. They are not going to take flight, but I have a lot of room to, since these are ballet shorts. They're nice and snug, they're super comfortable, and the cool part is that they're really voluminous even without the stuffers in them. So once I add the stuffers into them, these are going to be the biggest pants in the yard. So I'm very excited for when I add the stocking stuffers, but I'm really happy with how these turned out, and they were a lot harder to make than I thought. So let's move on. Okay, so the old bloomers I made, my sister stole, so I have to make some more. I got this pretty gingham fabric. So like I said, we're gonna sew the side seams together. This is gonna be the elastic channel for the bottom. And then these are the 3 tiers that are gonna go on here. But I'm gonna have to serge everything first. And then once these are sewn, these will get sewn. And then these will get folded over and I'll sew the elastic through. So let's do this again.
So, funnily enough, the original idea for this cosplay was to do kind of like a historical sleeve stuffer, but for pants. And I found that it stuffed the bloomers too much, that it compromised this, the delicate stitching of the smocking. So I actually got this idea from my sister, since she likes to wear a lot of these ruffly, frilly like bloomers. They are great because, as cute as they are, they actually do really good at being petticoats. So for something like shorts, these are perfect. So basically what I've done is I've serged all of the panel pieces individually, and then I made these little elastic channels. These are going to go on the bottom of the bloomer, since for the very edge of the bloomer I want a cute frilly ribbon to go on the end. Since these are very narrow, about an inch thick, and I intend to feed the elastic through with my bodkin, I'm doing a very tiny narrow stitch on either side so that my bodkin has enough room to get through this elastic channel. For the elastic channel at the waistband, I actually added extra seam allowance at the top so that I could just fold it over and top stitch it down the same way. The only difference here is that I'm going to do more stitches than just the one here, since I don't have enough of that thick elastic for the top. So I'm going to do about 3 channels, since I have to use my thinner elastic for the top part. Now, here is the most annoying part of the very cute ruffle bloomers, is actually sewing the ruffle on. Now, thankfully I am using gingham, which is kind of like a gridded fabric, and it makes it really easy for me to gauge if the ruffles are straight, since I can kind of use like the boxes as a guide. Otherwise, I have done like little chalk stitch, like drawing tick marks throughout the bloomers to kind of give me an idea of if my bloomers are symmetrical. Unfortunately, I completely forgot to do a full try-on of just the bloomers, but I will say that these make quite the difference with the smock shorts. So if you have any kind of delicate smocking that you feel like just needs a little bit more volume and you don't want to compromise the structure, definitely give these a try. I also think these would work really great for like Lolita fashion or just J fashion alternative styles in general. These are really cute bloomers despite how annoying they are to sew. Now we can finally move on to the peplum. Now, as you might know, I did have to remake this since I didn't like the original fabric that I used, but the construction process for these is pretty much the same. I'm using a circle skirt pattern that I already have on hand that is custom fit to my waist measurement. The thought process is since this is a peplum and not a skirt, I'm hoping that I'll have enough excess fabric to pleat this down if it's only supposed to go around half of my waist. Although in hindsight, I do kind of wish that I had just done like 2 circle skirts or something, because while I did have just enough fabric to pleat down for the peplum, I definitely wish I had more of a flouncy one. So if you want a super flouncy peplum, definitely consider doing 2 circle skirts instead of 1. The plan is to base the taffeta layer to the brocade layer. So basically I am cutting them at the same measurements, and then I'm trimming about 2 to 3 inches off the top of the taffeta layer since we want a little bit of the brocade to show through. Don't cut too much though, because we still have to serge this and double fold hem it. So I only cut about 2 inches off the peplum initially. Now with circle skirts, you do want to hang your fabric for at least a day before you work with it, as when you cut fabric on the bias, it can stretch. These were sitting for about 3 days before I worked with them, but basically I am going to serge both the taffeta and the brocade layer. Again, not super necessary since I plan to line this garment and I'm double fold hemming the taffeta, but I gotta serge it. I gotta know all the seams are finished, okay? After everything is serged, I did a double fold hem on the taffeta layer, and then I'm going to base that onto the brocade layer. This was a very finicky process as the taffeta definitely wanted to kind of pucker when I was working with it, so I used a lot of pins when sewing this piece so that everything would stay nice and flat. You could try doing this traditional way by just doing like a binding out of the brocade, but I thought that would be more difficult than doing it this way, but I don't know, maybe I'll try it next time. Mini anecdote, but this was one of the hardest parts of the cosplay, was figuring out what kind of lace border I wanted for the peplum. After like weeks of deliberating, I decided to pay an homage to the old peplum that I made, and I went and found a thicker like length of this outdoor lace ribbon that I found at Walmart, and this is what I used for the peplum. It's not fully to my taste just right out of the box, so I am going to do more to this, but for now I'm just top stitching it on. Finding the perfect stitch to add as a border to this lace was pretty difficult, but I finally decided to do a scallop stitch, and I'm very happy I chose this. It's super cute. Basically what I'm doing is doing like a satin stitch border, but it's in a scallop shape. And if you're curious about the color of the thread I use, I finally decided on using a very, 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 very light pink. So it kind of matches the lace, kind of matches the brocade, kind of matches the taffeta. It just works. Now, because my scallop stitch is very narrow, there are going to be little gaps where the previous lace kind of peeks through, and also I wanted to add a little bit more sparkle. Since there's sparkle in the iridescent thread of the brocade and sparkle in the lace, I thought, well, why don't I just turn the sparkle up by like, I don't know, 100. In the past, I've used tacky glue to attach all of my AB rhinestones, but I thought I would be a fancy girl and actually use gem tack. And okay, gem tack is pretty good. The only downside is that it's very expensive. This bottle will run you anywhere from $8 to almost $12 depending on where you buy it, whereas tacky glue you can buy for almost as cheap as $2. So if you have the money, spend it, but I haven't had any issues with tacky glue personally. After about 6 hours, I'm finally done with the rhinestoning, and oh my god, it's always worth it to rhinestone. I just love the extra glitter detail. The last thing I'm going to do to the peplum is line it, and I'm opting for this voile cotton fabric since it's a little bit see-through, and it's going to allow some of the iridescent threads of the brocade to really shine through. Here it is just getting sewn right sides together, and usually with circle skirts I like to sandwich like horsehair braid in it to kind of give it some volume, but thanks to the brocade I actually could have skipped this step as it really didn't need it since it was super structured on its own. After a good iron, I'm turning this right sides out and I'm doing a very last top stitch just to hold everything in place. This peplum attaches to the front of the bodice with hook and bars if you're curious about how I attach it. While I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and make a detachable panty for the cosplay as well. Pink Diamond has almost like a bodysuit on, and since the ballet bodice is the direction I chose, I'm making this as a detachable piece so that it looks like a bodysuit. So I did self-draft this, and it is the same embossed satin, and then I'm using the velvet, stretch velvet that actually came out as the wrong color for the gloves to use as the lining for this. The reason I'm not super going over the pattern for this is because I don't love how this piece came out and I actually have plans to remake this, but I guess if you wanted to make something like this, you could always use maybe a swimsuit bottom as a guide, but this is just a piece that kind of goes over the shorts but underneath the bodice, so it kind of gives the illusion that I'm wearing a bodysuit. Okay, now let's move on to the gloves. So I'm trying to redeem myself because I think my first pair of gusseted gloves for my Rose Miku cosplay kind of turned out horrendous and I want to redo. So this time I'm not self-drafting them. I got a Dr. Cos gusseted glove pattern in the size medium. Basically, there is a full comprehensive instruction paper when you go to get the pattern, and I believe it's free actually, so I highly recommend that if you want to try making gusseted gloves, definitely give that pattern a try. I find the easiest way to make gusseted gloves is to start out with the thumb piece. Then once you have it sewn onto the base of the glove, you go by adding each gusset to each part of the finger first. This will make sense if you read the instruction paper for the Dr. Cos pattern, but they basically account for, you want a little bit of extra piece of your gusset to go past the finger when you go to sew each one of them. Anyway, after you have all of your gussets sewn together, then you have the easiest part, which is just sewing all of your fingers closed like normal. Once you go to sew your gloves closed, you can either try out the lightning or stretch stitch, or you can just use a typical zigzag stitch for closing your glove seam. Now here is where I'm going to have a little bit of a complaint for the Dr. Cos patterns. So I actually got the medium size for the glove, and unfortunately both the gussets and the whole arm portion for the glove were way too small for me. So while I could salvage the gloves since they were a little stretchy, I couldn't really salvage the arm piece, so I had to make my own, which I'm doing here. So if you do try the Dr. Cos pattern, definitely go larger than you think. I really like this pattern, but I think next time I'm going to get maybe even an extra large next time because the medium was really tight on my fingers. So here I'm just attaching the self-drafted arm piece to the regular part of the glove, and I'm purposefully leaving a gap here because I like to be able to use my hands when eating and paying for stuff in Artist Alley. So if you're also a person who kind of wants to have your hands accessible with these long gloves, You can either do like a detachable glove, you could do a hole like I'm doing here, or you could even like cut out little holes into the finger portion so you can still use stuff like your phone. Really, it's up to you. Honestly guys, I'm really proud of these gloves. Stretch velvet is so annoying to work with, and I think these came out super clean, despite the fact that they're a little bit too tight, but I think they're a huge improvement from my Rose Miku gloves for sure. The last thing that I'm going to do for the gloves is hem them, and for this I'm just going to do a regular hem with, I believe, a zigzag stitch or a lightning stitch could work for this too. I highly recommend for these, maybe feed like a little bit of elastic into this, because I noticed that they did tend to sag a little bit when I was wearing them at the con.
A different part of my room! This is still my room. It is just, usually I sit in this corner with all of my prints, but this time it's because the lighting is better and stuff. Anyway, I just wanted to briefly explain something that I'm working on, since I'm not really showing the progress of how I'm making it, and I do want to keep you guys updated. So here is what I'm working on. It is this adorable little ruff. That's how it's looking at the moment. I don't have everything sewn, but that's how it's looking. I'm sure you have questions. The first question is, why am I making a ruff? Well, I'm making a ruff because this costume is inspired by Harlequinade or Harlequin, and those are Italian 16th century jesters, basically, and they usually wear ruffs and jester hats. So I figured there's a lot of stuff going on with the bloomers and the shoes and the wig and the sleeves, and I think she needs some kind of choker to balance everything out. But the other thing is that I do not want to paint my chest, and my shirt does not cover my neck fully. So I want something to kind of mesh the two together so that I only have to paint my face. When I was making it though, I had actually purchased this like, I don't know if you can see, but it's gradient ribbon. It is gradient ribbon. And I had purchased it for pink and then quickly realized I have no idea what to do with this ribbon. So I'm using this because I bought it for this cosplay, and it just makes sense to make it out of this because I had it and the reason I'm not showing the process of how I was making it is, one, because I was doing it in class and I did not want to bring my camera, and two, because I am following the Stitch S tutorial on ruffs while making this. So I'm not going to show the process of how I made it because it's just their tutorial, but I will show some work in progress of me working on it. So let's get started.
So what we're making is called a theatrical ruff, and if you buy this blanket binding, it actually speeds up the process a lot. For making this, I'm starting off by serging the pieces just so that everything is nice and clean, and then for all of the ruffle pieces, I'm going to baste the two layers together so that they don't shift around while I'm sewing the cartridge pleats. So this is after I have already done the cartridge pleats for the ruffle portion. Basically what I'm doing now is tacking the ruffles onto the neck portion using a French knot. Afterwards, I also added a hook and bar closure for the necklace and a Velcro closure for the wrist cuffs. The last thing I did to both the theatrical ruff and cuffs is added pearls in between all of the little ruffles. This did take a while, and there's about 160 pearls among all three pieces, but I considered there's already pearls on the shorts and the sleeves, so why the hell not? Luckily, everything is super easy to put on, so here's how the gloves look with the cuffs that I made. Next, let's move on to the shoes.
Trust and believe, I have literally found the perfect, most canon shoes for Pink Diamond ever. fur. Look at them. Look at them. These are literally perfect. And if you didn't think they were perfect enough, which I don't know why you wouldn't. Yeah.
Another thing that makes these shoes perfect is that they're real leather, so painting these are going to be super easy. Every cosplayer is going to recommend Angelus, I'm not sure how to pronounce her name, but Angelus leather paints. So with leather, you actually have to prime it before you paint it. If you don't want a primer or don't have the money to buy a primer, a 100% acetone will work to properly clean the leather, but the least you want to do is clean it before you paint on it. For my particular project, it actually took about 4 or 5 coats to get a opacity that I was happy with, and a little art school tip, if you want to minimize on brush strokes, change the direction that you paint for each coat and make thin coats as you paint them, and it kind of meshes your brush strokes together so that they are harder to see. For all of the roses, I mix in a little bit of silver so that they have a little bit of sheen or like a glossy look to them when they catch the light. Now, in a pinch, you can get away with not sealing leather paint, but I actually recommend that you do. These have started to crack a little bit, and I've had other shoes crack the same way, so maybe seal them after you paint them. I'm finishing up the shoes by adding some extra details to them with these rhinestones. I figured they're all over the peplum, why not add them all over the shoes as well? The last thing I'm doing is hand sewing all of the store-bought ribbon and pom-poms onto the shoes. I decided to add these crossover ballet ribbons onto the shoes, since this cosplay kind of gives me ballet vibes and we've already made a bodice, so why not? Since this is leather, this is pretty tough to sew through, so you could also try using a thimble if you have any issues with this. Here's a tip from when I took ballet classes when I was a kid. Backstitch the ribbon that you sew onto your shoes, it always makes them stronger. Aren't these shoes so cute? Everything on this cosplay looks like food and I want to eat it. Now, we are down to the very last thing for this cosplay, so let me tell you how I made this wig.
I'm a little embarrassed to say I am a black woman, and I have never bought braiding hair before. Until today. Usually with my wig projects, I buy either hair from Arta Wigs, Epic Cosplay Wigs, or I just get something cheap off of Amazon. And then it dawned on me when I was watching one of Blue Clarissa's videos, braiding hair actually makes a lot of sense. For one, this entire 56-inch length was $6. It comes with 3 bundles, and it is also texturized, so it's already crimped, if you will, so I don't need to crimp this hair. I just need to turn them into wefts. I haven't been very good about incorporating parts of my culture into the cosplays that I've made in the past, and I thought I needed to rectify that. Usually to do wig projects like Rose and Miku, I buy about 2 either long weft packs or I buy 2 wigs. But with this, just because you're getting so much hair, I only bought 2, and I don't think I'm gonna need all of it, to be honest, because it's 56 inches. Unfortunately, I do not have all of the supplies that I usually do for making wigs, so making this wig is going to be quite the stretch. I'm gonna stop dawdling, I'm gonna work with this pre-braided hair, and we're gonna make a pink diamond wig. This is a canon event, guys. I went to Sonic Expo this last weekend and literally saw this print on their display. No other Steven Universe character, just Pink Diamond, And I'm like, if that's not a sign, I don't know what kind of sign it is, but it's a sign, and she's beautiful.
So to start, I do all of my wig work on these silicone mats since they're really good for cleanup. You will start to learn this as you get better with wigs, but you want to grab not too thick but not too thin of an amount, enough that it covers the distance of what you're trying to lay the weft on. In the past for gluing wefts, I've used Uhu glue, and I still think it is the strongest drying glue and the fastest drying, but I'm also trying this Tomboy glue. It's technically used for scrapbooking. It's not as strong as Uhu glue in my opinion, but it does still do a really good job of gluing wefts, and it does dry pretty quickly as well. In my experience with this glue, a little goes a long way. I find that I can get through an entire 3 projects with this glue over having to use 3 bottles of Uhu glue for one project. And this glue is non-toxic, unlike Uhu glue. And here's how the payoff looked with the Tomboy glue. If you are willing to wait the 20 to 30 minutes that it takes for clear tacky glue to dry, clear tacky glue is the cheapest among all the glues, and I think it has the strongest hold compared to the rest of the glues as well. The only thing is that you have to be very light-handed with clear tacky glue, as you can get quite a thick, clear cast on the glue, unlike the Tomboy or the Uhu glue where you can be pretty heavy-handed and it's kind of hard to detect that there's glue in the weft. If you're using this for a hairline, it doesn't really have to be feathered at the end, which is why I'm not really caring for these, but if you're doing this for a fake hairline or a fake lace front wig, then you might want to feather these out before you glue them because it's really hard to feather them out after they've dried. For strong wefts like these, I also like to make sure that the wefts are fully coated with glue. That's why I'm flipping them over after I've done the first coat on top to make sure all of the glue has saturated the hair before I leave it out to dry. From my personal experience, Uhu glue and Tomboy glue takes anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes before I'm confident enough to work with it, and like I said, clear tacky glue takes about 30 minutes to an hour. The second method I'm trying is actually from Keegan Cosplay. Here I'm using a wet toothbrush instead of the silicone spatula, and from my experience, I don't think this is strong enough again for a parted hairline, for the back of wigs, or any kind of weft that you need this to be super strong, but if you want to use this for a fake hairline or somewhere where you really need the glue to be non-visible on the weft, I think this is a great way to kind of fan out the glue and water it down so that it has a much more natural look. Look, wigs are finicky and wigs are hard. A lot of this is just trial and error, and what works for me might not work for you. I did try to use at least 3 different glues and 2 different techniques to give you some ideas about how you want to do your wefts, but my best recommendation is just to try it and see what works best for you.
Okay, so the first part of my old wig video that I feel like I didn't explain very well is how to actually make a custom base pattern for your wig head. Now, you can cut fiber off of a wig, glue it back on with the cotton batting, and you will get a wig that works fine. I did this for Celestia, and it works just fine. Personally, I like doing the custom fit ones. That way, they're just a little bit tighter on my head and all that great stuff. If you have thicker or longer hair like I do, I highly recommend doing this. The first thing you want to do is actually put your hair in the style you plan on putting on when you wear the wig. This is going to give you the most accurate shape of your head versus to just put it over your head, because you have to account for the hair. You want cling wrap. This is the same stuff that I use for my duct tape patterns for my body. Now, obviously, you only want to cling wrap your head. Do not cling wrap your eyes, your nose, or your mouth, because you need to breathe. So I'm just doing one piece around the whole part of my head, and then I can feel at the top that I missed some, so I just have a small extra piece, and I'm just gonna lay it on the top part. Okay, so I have covered my ears, and I've gone lower on the nape of my neck. So tape is your next part. I am using masking tape because it is what I have. I use this for makeup, I use this for drafting patterns. I think masking tape is the best because you can use it for other things. But I'd actually recommend you get duct tape, Duct tape just shapes. I personally think you can get a more accurate vibe on the fit of your pattern with duct tape. Flat, not again, so I'm going flat. I don't think it super matters, but basically we're going to go all the way around the head. And then since I taped over my ears, I'm just gonna draw out where my ear is. So I am going to cut out the ear holes, and then we're gonna take this over to my mannequin head. Okay, so we have our alien head pinned to our mannequin head. Now, in other videos, I would be telling you that I'd cut this part apart so that I can make a pattern out of it and sew it to the foss shape. But my sewing machine broke, so we are doing a no sewing machine method of this. Basically, I have some polyfill, so I'm going to fill the wig head with this and then heat shape the foss shape directly to this shape.
Y'all don't judge me, foss shape is like $30 a yard. Basically what I'm doing is I'm using all of my foss shape scraps to create a wig head. So I'm kind of amalgamating them together and holding them together with pins. Since foss shape is a thermal fabric? It like hardens when you heat it up. I'm less worried about this compromising the structure, and I'm gonna cover this with felt anyway, so do as I say, not as I do. But the strongest way to do this is probably to just either sew the pieces together or to heat shape a whole fabric panel over the wig head. I got the idea to use foss shape as the structure layer for wigs from Sarah Spaceman, and she recommends that you use a steamer to heat up the foss shape. Now, I have tried a hairdryer and a heat gun, and they work okay, but the point of the steamer is that it hardens the inside and the outside of the wig. So honestly, it just takes extra work to do this any other way, and steamers are honestly great for so many other purposes of cosplay. I'd recommend that you just get a steamer and steam this with that. Now, since my wig cap is going to be less strong since I'm using amalgamated foss shape scraps, I'm using this felt to both color match it to the wig wefts and to add on as an extra structure layer for the wig. Some other alternatives to doing this is to either dye the foss shape or paint it. Now, I have dyed foss shape in the past, and do keep in mind that when it heats up, it does harden. So it does give you a more even color payoff, but it does get a little finicky. But choose whichever method works best for you. So here's how everything looks together after the fabric glue fully dried. As you can see, even with the scraps that we use, this is still a pretty strong and fortified wig cap that is also like very fitted to my head. So that's why I use this method, because it works great. Okay, bear with me on this next part. We are kind of working with what I have since I was broke when I made this wig, so I will give you the recommendations of what you should use, but I'll tell you what I'm doing, just don't do what I'm doing. So the hair needs a structure to lay on. It can't just really stand on its own, and kind of layering the hair on top of each other would be way too heavy. So what I'm trying to do is make a structure that is as light as possible. What I had on hand was floral wire, but I actually recommend you use something like 14 gauge wire for something like this. This is what I've used for drill curls in the past, and they are a great method. So because I'm using floral wire and it's not very good at standing up on its own, I'm using tulle and polyfill to kind of flesh out the shape and help the floral wire to stand up on its own. Again, if you use 14 gauge wire like you're supposed to, you could probably get away with using tape. I'm just doing this because the floral wire wouldn't stand up on its own very well otherwise. And if you're one of those people going, Komiko, your wig is lopsided, we've talked about this. Roses are not symmetrical in nature. So we are at what I would argue is the hardest part of making wigs, getting hair to go over an unnatural shape. Like, you know, a rosebud. In this case, I have a couple of recommendations after making maybe 5 drill curl wigs at this point. So the first thing that I do is I actually use hot glue. Now, I would not recommend you use hot glue for the entire wig. It will melt and come off if you're at a con that is very hot. I just use hot glue because tacky glue takes forever to dry, and I need something to kind of hold the weft down while I'm gluing the rest of the hair. And if you're curious as to why I'm using pre-texturized or otherwise crimped hair for this instead of regular hair, you can try to use regular hair. I would advise that you crimp it. It not only gives extra volume, so you end up using less hair and saving money, but pre-texturized and crimped hair is a lot easier to handle than some of the silky fibers of wigs. So if you want to make it easier and cheaper for yourself, just crimp your wig. After I've tacked on the base of my weft with the hot glue, I'm going to use tacky glue underneath where I want the hair to lie down and then trim off the excess. When I'm trimming off the excess, I either will use tacky glue if I'm feeling fancy, or you can use Uhu glue or tomboy glue for a lighter hold, but for the edge of the wig, depending on where it is, it doesn't matter. For this one, it's going to get covered up with felt, so it doesn't matter, but if this is going into like a ponytail, you might want to use something stronger like tacky glue. The last thing that you want to do is put some kind of glue coating over the top of the weft that you just made. For my wigs, I always use a tool shield afterwards, so I can get away with just using hairspray. But if you are not going to put a tool shield over your wig, I highly recommend that you use some kind of glue to cover it. From my personal experience, anything that was not covered in tulle will get messed up at the con. So you might want to use something heavyweight like Uhu glue or tacky glue if you're not going to cover your hair in tulle. Now there is an exception to the rule. Obviously, if you're doing something like maybe like a Silas wig, for example, where it's not really going to be touching anything, or maybe a Roxas wig, I think you'd be fine with not adding something like tulle to that. And also, how would you add tulle to that? But for anything that's super structured, like my pink diamond wig, or a drill curl wig, or especially anything that might brush up on your costume, I highly recommend adding a tulle shield, as it means that you don't have to keep touching up the wig between wears. So this is the first pass of the wig. After this, we are going to work on the rose portion for the back of the wig. So I actually got the idea to put a rose on the back of the wig from Bonnie Bell Cosplays on Instagram and TikTok. Now, I could have done it a little bit closer to what they did, but this is kind of like the lazy way of doing it. I'm starting off with a felt backing so that the hair will adhere to this better and it gives me a flat surface to work with. Basically, I am like gluing the hair in a spiral, and as I'm going to twist the hair into different shapes as I go, since once again, roses are not symmetrical in nature, so the back of the rose can't be either. Since this hair is getting manipulated into a very specific shape, I'm using the hot glue to tack it down. But to compromise, I'm using the tomboy glue over the work that I just did to kind of add as an extra structural layer. And I did copious amounts of hairspray afterwards. Slowly and surely, I just kept going in a spiral motion until I got to a shape that I was happy with. I shared this with my sister and she said it looks like a giant lollipop, and now I can't unsee it. But a lot of wig work is patience. This process took several hours over the span of 2 days in order to get perfect. So just go slow and go with the flow. Now we are on to the easier part, which is the bangs. For starters, I glue some of my wefts flat, and then for the pieces that I want to give a faux hairline, I glue them in the opposite direction and then fold them over. Now here is where I struggled with the braiding hair a little bit, and this did take a bit of a learning curve. So with regular wigs, using a flex rod and a steamer is my go-to way for making barrel curls or ringlet curls. But for the braiding hair, this method did not work. I mean, it kind of did, but it didn't give me as tight of a curl as I wanted. What I ended up doing is using like a pencil and heating it up with a straightener. And funnily enough, this actually worked really well with the braiding hair. Another thing I found with the braiding hair is that it does not have as high of a temperature for straightening as for regular wigs. So I found that I stayed at around 350 for heating up the hair versus how some wigs can go up to 400 degrees.
It has just dawned on me that I am standing in front of a pink background, so seeing the wig actually might not be that easy. And then once the net is over it, I have these cute little roses that I'm probably gonna add here, on the other side, and throughout the wig, just because it'll help bring back some of the colors of the costume to the wig. So I'm specifically using all of the roses that match the colors of the fabrics. I'm not mad at this wig. Yeah, let's move on to the next thing.
So the next thing I'm gonna do to this wig is shade the roots. And usually I see people do this with a airbrush, but I saw someone use eyeshadow on this and I thought I would try it because this is a super economical choice. I think this is especially important on someone like Pink Diamond who has a super light colored wig, because this definitely adds a lot more dimension to the wig. So I definitely will be using this technique in the future. It takes a little while as you have to blend everything out and build up the color, so it's probably going to take longer than doing this with an airbrush, but considering I, don't have an airbrush, I think this method works great. So the last thing that I'm going to do to this wig before I do all of the accessories is we need a way to protect all of this pretty work that we just did. Usually with wigs like drill curl wigs, I just do tulle, but I could not find a way to get the tulle to kind of shape around the curves of this wig. So hairnet is what we'll be using instead. This is beautifully ironic in a way because hairnets is what is used for keeping your hair together in a bun for ballet class, but for this wig it had to be special. I actually had to amalgamate 3 hairnets together to cover the full length of the wig. I positioned the 3 hairnets where I wanted them specifically on the wig, and then I'm gonna go ahead and glue the roses on, as they'll kind of help to hold the hairnet in place a little bit more seamlessly. Even with the roses glued to the bun, there are going to be gaps where the hairnet isn't connected properly. There are a couple ways that you could go about doing this that are a little bit more seamless than sewing needle and thread, but personally, I find that this is probably going to be the strongest way to do it. I just did it with a very light pink thread so that it could match the wig as best as possible. If you do ever find yourself in a situation where you have to sew something to a very curved or strange surface, like a rose bun, then I would recommend you use a curved needle. These are used a lot of times for sew-ins or anything where you're sewing something on a head or otherwise curved surface. Unfortunately, I could not find my sewing needle, so I am choosing the struggle method. And here is how the wig turned out. I think this looked pretty awesome considering the limited amount of supplies I had this time around. Everything on this cosplay looks like food and I want to eat it. Hey, so do you remember that time that I said the wig was the last thing we had to make for this cosplay? Well, I lied. The sleeve supports are the last thing we're making for this cosplay. When you have massive sleeves on a cosplay, like for my Pink Diamond cosplay, you need something to hold the shape of that. And I decided to kind of make my own sleeve support for this. This is kind of like a hoop skirt, but for your arm. If you're curious about the pattern, this is just a lightly gathered sleeve pattern that I already had in my stash. Although if I could go back, I probably would have made the gathers a little bit larger so that this could hold a larger sleeve. Once these boning channels are sewn in, I'm going to add the same spiral steel boning that I've used for the rest of this cosplay to flesh out the shape of this hoop arm? The edges of these are going to have elasticized edges so that they stay up on my arm properly. Although I will say they do slide down a little bit, so maybe add some notion so that it stays up on your arm a little bit better. Okay, I promise this is the last thing. Let's go to Holmat now. If you don't already know, Holmat, or Holiday Matsuri, is a Florida convention that is held at the Orange County Convention Center and the Hyatt Regency Orlando. It is held from December 19th to December 21st, but sometimes they change the dates. I absolutely love this con. I've been going for 3 years now, and this is my third time competing in the Winter Cosplay Championship, which is an international qualifier contest that has 4 total qualifiers this year. This year, contestants had to be there Thursday in order to do judging, and because I was NCC, I had to be there at 11 a.m., which meant I had to do my makeup in the car. Hi, I just got back from my judging slot. Basically, I had to do my makeup in the car, and then I had about 15 minutes to get ready before... Okay, I'm gonna prop it up on this shirt. Basically, I have 15 minutes to get ready, and then I had to spend 15 minutes walking to the OCCC with Achilles tendonitis. So my feet hurt really bad. But as far as the judging went, I already knew 3 of the judges because they were at DreamHack or were Atlanta local judges, so I already knew of them. And then the other 2 I did my research on, and so I knew of them before coming, and all of them were very nice, very kind. I had a good time. I thought I had 4 minutes, so I planned for 4, but I only had 3 minutes. But I improv'd, and I pretty much said everything I wanted to say and more. So I'm very confident that at least my judging went well. I don't actually know if I'm gonna place, but I actually talked to some of the other NCC people, and oh my God. I've competed NCC twice, and both times all the NCC people were amazing. But I don't know what it is about this year particularly, but everybody brought their A game. Like there's some really pretty cosplays this year. But otherwise, I will see you guys tomorrow for the show. I just got back from the fan-made mixer. So basically all of the contestants kind of got together for a little mixer since Holmat doesn't really host them manually anymore. And it made me really happy because as someone with autism and a lot of social anxiety, I remember the first time that I competed, I didn't talk to anyone and I didn't know anyone, and I didn't feel comfortable enough to actually talk to anybody when I was there. Very excited for tomorrow because I actually get to see builds in person. But my little tangent is to say, if you are considering competing, talk to people. If you go to a contest and you're in the green room, talk to someone back there. And if you don't know what to talk about, tell them that you really like their cosplay or that you recognize the fabric they used or something. Because I know for me and most people, we love talking about our special interest, which in this case is cosplay. And we love talking about our builds and learning from each other and inspiring each other. I may or may not go over the specifics of this, but a lot of talking to other contestants is what heavily inspired so many pieces of not just my pink diamond build, but even some of my earlier builds are inspired by some of my fellow contestants. But anyway, we went to Disney. It was great. But the real fun begins tomorrow, since that'll be the actual skit portion of the contest, so I guess I will see you then. 7 a.m. Friday started off my Holmat. I had rehearsals at 9 a.m. for NCC, and I had a photo shoot at 10 a.m. afterwards, so I had to get ready pretty quickly. I'm starting off with the NYX Face Glue Face Primer. I got this tip from Peachy Cosplay, and then I decided I would try out the Athena palette. So what I'm doing is mixing the white and the pink together, since Pink Diamond has a really light pink. skin tone, so I was trying to mix the colors together to get that payoff. The Athena palette is an oil-based face paint, and if you want oil paints to do what you want them to, you have to heat them up. So here I am mixing it with the back of my makeup brush on the palm of my hand to try to heat it up while I'm mixing up the colors. Now, I don't know if this is user error, but I found the white and the pink of the Athena palette really hard to mix. Like, no matter how much I mixed it in, I still found little clumps of white when I was mixing them together, and you'll kind of see it here. The way I fixed it is just kind of picked it off when I found it, but I'm not really sure why this happened. You can use whatever method works best for you, but I find using a cheap beauty blender is the best way for me to spread out the face paint. You're probably going to want to go with something cheaper and disposable because this is really hard to get out of the beauty blender. I kind of use like the oil-based makeup remover if you want to remove like face paint out of a beauty blender. It's just really hard. Unlike for Pomni, where my ears and my neck are fully covered through the costume, my ears and my neck are out for Pink Diamond, so I'm also blending this down my neck and to my ears just so that I help spread the illusion with the cosplay. Blending the face paint is probably the part that takes the longest, so it just takes a lot of patience, but definitely don't dab too hard onto the skin as this can lift the face paint while you're trying to blend it. The most important part of keeping your face paint on is setting it. Usually I go for baby powder, but I thought I would try this kimchi setting powder in pink. Now, while this worked fine, I do find that I'm pretty heavy-handed with the setting powder just because you don't want any part to be tacky. So I actually would recommend that you just go with baby powder or something cheap since this, setting powder is a little bit expensive. The other thing that I found is that I find it a little bit easier to press in the powder with a brush over a powder puff. So now comes the exciting part, the contouring. So I picked up this Blend Bunny palette and I absolutely love this. This is super pigmented and it has every color you could possibly need for cosplay. So I'm going to start off with the lightest pink shade just to add a little bit more pink hue into the higher points of my face. With the light pink base down, I'm going to go in with the darker shade and the medium pink shade to kind of add a little bit more contour. Afterwards, I'm using the white eyeshadow to add a little bit more highlight to the corners of my eyes and the bridge of my nose. I personally think I'm really bad at contour, so if you're anything like me, just hold on to your blending brush, and if there's any leftover pink eyeshadow on that, you can kind of use it to help blend out any of the harsher lines that you want to smooth out. Annoyingly enough, I had some eyeshadow that really wanted to stick to the side of my forehead, but for anything like that, it technically gets covered up by the bang, so it doesn't really matter. For the eyebrows, I'm using the darkest pink shade and my angled brush to kind of map out where I want my eyebrows to start. If you struggle to get your eyebrows symmetrical, start off with thin lines and then work your way up. Now, I usually put in my contacts before I do my makeup, especially for oil paints, but I completely forgot, so I'm just now putting them in. These are the day contacts that I got from Japan. You use them once and then you throw them out. I really love these, they're super comfortable to wear. Now, if you've watched any of my other makeup tutorials, I usually use masking tape to make a super sharp wing with my eyeshadow. Unfortunately, I cannot do that for face paint, as it'll completely rip off all the hard work that I did previously. So what I'm doing is taking that angled brush and kind of drawing out like an outline for where I want my eyeshadow to go. Once I have this line properly drawn, this is going to be the outline, so it's kind of going to tell me where I want to stop when I'm blending out the rest of my eyeshadow. I'm going to take my fluffy brush and I'm going to incorporate all three pinks that I used in the contour to kind of add a little bit of eyeshadow to this look. This look is going to stay monochromatic as I think it works for Pink Diamond, but for other looks you can use whatever colors you want, or hell, you could even add green to Pink Diamond if you want. Also, if you have a really hard time blending out darker eyeshadows, actually take a lighter shade, one that closely matches whatever skin tone or foundation that you're using, It makes it so much easier to blend out. The last thing that I'm going to add is glitter, obviously. I also got this Blend Bunny Cosmetics Shimmer Palette, and it is absolutely perfect for cosplay makeup looks. I'm using the super light pink to kind of add a little bit more dimension to my makeup, and I'm also going to use this as a highlight as well. So I actually don't own a hot pink lipstick, so I'm just using the same eyeshadow palette from the Blend Bunny Cosmetics, and I'm using that as like a lipstick as well. I will say from wearing this all day, this will stay on your lips. It did not need that much touch up throughout the day, even after eating, but I will say this is extremely drying for your lips, especially with like the oil paints that I set underneath. So you could use this in a pinch, but lipstick is probably the smarter option. Lastly, if you're curious, I use the Wet n Wild eyeliner for my eyeliner and underlashes. It has a super thin applicator brush, so it's perfect for drawing eyelashes. I actually don't like a lot of eyelashes on me, so I specifically use the spiked Dolian makeup inspired ones. You can get them on like 8 packs on like AliExpress or Amazon. And then for the eyelash glue, I actually like the one with the brush applicator tip, so I use the one from Eyler. And if you're curious which setting spray I use the Tear Sunscreen Setting Spray. It comes in an aerosol can, so as a person with asthma, I always feel like I'm dying when I spray it. But this is the finished makeup look, so let me debut the cosplay for you. So here is the final result of the cosplay. I'm super embarrassed. Usually I have way more footage of the cosplay than I do for this video, but when I tell you that WCC had me busy like all weekend of the con, I just completely forgot to film. But thanks to my friend Alexis, I got some footage of my cosplay backstage.
So, I placed at the Winter Cosplay Championships. Now, this is my 3rd time competing at this cosplay contest. I did place my first year. I got a judge's award my first year. The second year I didn't place, and this is actually my first time winning a sponsored award. I think it is such a special and full circle moment because when I was making this wig, I did not have access to the resources I usually do for literally every other wig I've made in the past. I kind of had to work with what I was given, and it just feels truly heartening to know that 1, I know what I'm doing as far as wigs are concerned, and 2, that I really had to get creative with the construction process for this wig. So I am very proud and honored to have placed for the wig that I created because it is one of my favorite parts of this cosplay. Now, my takeaways for Pink Diamond are I'm pretty happy with how the cosplay turned out. As I said in the video, it is one of my most comfortable cosplays that I've ever made, thanks to it not being a corseted garment, and I wear flats the whole day. I think it's a pretty comfortable cosplay, and I'm really happy with the construction, even though here and there are a few things I wish I did differently. The only thing that I'm going to remake for this cosplay are the panty part, because that one was just uncomfortable to wear, but everything else I'm really happy with. And I'm always so hard on myself when it comes to my builds because I like to compare myself to master level cosplayers, and I have to keep reminding myself that I know what I'm doing, I'm only gonna improve, and there's no point in comparing myself because my cosplay is just as beautiful and valid as everyone else's. Now, if you are curious, I got a $250 Purple Plum wig gift card, so I thought I would show you what I got.
because my order shipped out in 2 days, mind you, after I placed my order. Here is the package. So let's open this up. The first thing I got is their, oh dear. They have like a typical Miku wig. So it is a short wig with pigtail clip-on attachments. They were sold out of the Miku version in white. So what I did is just got the ponytail version and then purchased a separate ponytail because it was available. Now, from what I'm thinking, this will probably be for either 2025 Symphony Miku or 2025 Snow Miku. I have not decided yet. I might only make one wig for both of them since they're pretty similar, but that's like the plan for this one. The next thing I got is their ponytail wig. So this is the one that has the split part in the middle and then the extra pieces on the back. And then I purchased 2 of their long weft pieces in bubblegum pink, if I'm not mistaken. So the plan is in the video, I actually talked about how I had to scrap the hand-beaded peplum that I made for my Pink Diamond cosplay. And the plan was to make it for my Sakura Miku cosplay. And this is what I intend to be the wig. Now, I don't know if this is going to be enough hair for a full pigtail. I'll have to crimp it and see, but it's a start for sure. The next thing I got is just a simple ringlet fashion wig. Now, if you're a Lolita fashion haver like I am, you probably know what the maple wigs are. And I used to own one, and for some reason I just didn't like how it looked on me. So I'm hoping this one is a little better of an alternative. It has the ringlet curls already in it, so I'm very excited to see how this works out. The next thing I got is just a long weft of their red wefts, wig wefts. I have a Shadybug wig that I made, and I actually ran out of red hair when I was making it, and the wefts that I used were in the bargain bin from Cospadio from Japan. So they're very cheap and I can't actually crimp them. My hope is that I can crimp these, since according to the website you can heat this up to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm hoping I can crimp these and cover up some of the balding wefts in my Shadybug wig. The next thing I got is a wavy long wig that was designed by Tasty Peach Studios apparently, and this is for my Princess Bubblegum cosplay. If you're curious, it's going to be an 1890s inspired look, and I probably will make a video on how I construct it, so look forward to that. The next thing I got are some of their long clip-on bangs. This is because I messed up the bangs on my Pomni wig, and I'm too lazy to crimp another 40-inch wig for that one, so. The next thing I got is a lace front wig for my Yuna cosplay. If you don't know, on Instagram I have plenty of posts about this, but I've done Yuna's Summoner cosplay. I made it back in 2022, and my plan is to make Summoner Yuna's cosplay for 2026. And I figured it was about time to upgrade that wig since I know so much more about wig making now, so I'm really excited to have a lace front wig for Yuna finally, since she has like the side bang and stuff. I think it's gonna look super cute, and I really like the brown color of this. And then the last wig I got is the same ringlet curl wig, but in like their salmon pink color. This is for Ichigo from Tokyo Mew Mew. I've been a huge fan of that show / manga series since I was a kid, and I've been putting off making that cosplay for literal years. And I don't know, I feel like she'd look super cute with ringlet curls, so I got this wig for her. And then the last thing I got is just a simple mesh wig cap. I personally like the mesh wig caps better. I think they're a little bit more comfortable, and this one was a pretty good price. So that is everything I got from Purple Plum Wigs with my $250 gift card. I'm pretty happy with my haul, and I'm really excited because I pretty much got every single wig I need for like all of MomoCon and some, so. The other thing is I talked about how in my video I started fixing up my Rose Miku cosplay from last year, and I actually went to DreamHack 2025 to recompete her, and I won second place in the novice category.
I feel really bad that I didn't record the video of how I made the wig because I'm really happy with how it turned out. But I learned a lot after making it, so I'm super confident that in my next drill curl wig, I'll be confident enough to tell you guys what I did because I feel like I've kind of gotten drill curl wigs down to a science. So stay tuned for that video. If you got to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. I did not anticipate this video to take so long to edit, and I also did not anticipate it taking this long to explain how I made this cosplay, but to be fair, this cosplay took me 9 months to make, and it is my most complex build to date, so I wasn't expecting it to be this long, but stuff happens in life, you know? I had to completely re-evaluate my editing process because a certain editing software that I used has questionable terms of services now with the use of AI. So I've been using DaVinci Resolve, and if you know anything about it, it is one of the most complex editing softwares out there. I've just completely had to redo how I've done stuff, and it's been a huge learning curve for sure. Please expect a video on how I made Rose Quartz coming up next, and I'll also post my full 2.5-minute video of my skit performance from Holiday Matsuri 2025 WCC NCC qualifier. With that being said, if you are curious, my cosplans for next year will be Scarlet Passion from Love and Deep Space, Summoner Yuna from Final Fantasy X, and an 1890s Princess Bubblegum from Adventure Time. I'm super excited to start on those, and I've already started buying fabric for all of them, so stay tuned for those videos. And I just want to say really quickly, thank you for over 1,000 subscribers. I started this channel exactly a year ago, and it just brings me so much joy that my videos help people make their cosplays, that they're entertaining to watch while you craft, or they help inspire you to craft yourself. The whole reason that I made this channel is literally to help others so that they don't struggle as hard as I did when making certain cosplays that just don't have a lot of media coverage on the internet. Thank you for coming to my small little corner of the internet, and I hope you enjoy your stay here. And, as always, I hope you, yes you, have a wonderful day.